Will MS shorten my life? Welcome to another episode of You and Me in Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 38 years. Yes, 38 years, and I'm 63 now. And a question that I've had ever since I was first told that I had multiple sclerosis was, is this going to shorten my life? And over the years, the opinions have varied on that. At one time, it was thought that no, it wouldn't at all. And in other times, it's been thought that it would shorten it to a certain extent. I kind of wanted to know what is the current thinking on that, because it's important to know, right? I mean, especially as you get older, you kind of want to know, what is the future possibly going to hold? Not that any of us really knows what the future is going to hold. I mean, anyone, even someone who doesn't have MS, they don't know when they're going to die, how long they're going to live, and they don't even necessarily know what they're going to die from or of. So having MS doesn't give you any more clear of an answer for sure, because nothing with MS is definitive, clear, or ironclad. But it is interesting to see what the literature is saying these days. So I thought I'd go out there and just look around at some different sources and see what's being said. And I wanted to share all that with you. I thought maybe you would find it interesting also. Well, this first article is from Healthline back in July 8th of 2021. And I'll just read a couple of excerpts from it. But I've got the link there, and as is true for all of what I'm going to cite here, I will put the links in the description so you can go read the whole article. But it says here that MS generally affects quality of life more than longevity. While certain types of MS can potentially affect lifespan, they are the exception, not the rule. So in other words, when we die with MS, not from MS. That is the current thinking and pretty reassuring. People with MS must contend with many difficult symptoms that will affect their lifestyle, but they can rest assured that with appropriate treatment of the disease, their life expectancy essentially mirrors that of people who don't have the condition. Another article that I looked at, this one came out of Very Well Health, and this was around the same time. It was in March of 2021. And it's called How Multiple Sclerosis Affects Life Expectancy. And their little tagline is, MS is rarely a fatal disease, but it may influence lifespan. So that's kind of the summary of their whole article. And what they say is that the life expectancy for those with MS has increased over time according to the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, thanks to treatment breakthroughs and improvements in MS treatments, better health care, and lifestyle changes. The last of these is especially important because it refers to self-care strategies that anyone with multiple sclerosis can implement to improve not only their longevity, but quality of life. So they're focused really on the quality of your life, not necessarily the length of it. I thought their graphic that they included was pretty helpful. Our comorbidity is another condition that is chronic and also affects the quality of your life. And so some of the ones that are common in our society in general, and certainly for those with MS, are high cholesterol, high blood pressure, gastrointestinal disease, thyroid disease, anxiety, depression, and alcohol abuse. Now, some of these you have total control over. Other ones you may have to go and see your primary care doctor and get them checked. Like you may not know what your cholesterol level is or your blood pressure is, but you can get those checked. And if they're out of the normal range, then that's something that you probably need to be paying attention to, because while MS isn't going to kill you, you're not going to feel very good at all if you've got some comorbidity that's making your life even more difficult than MS already is making it. And then they go on to say the life expectancy with multiple sclerosis A frequently stated statistic regarding multiple sclerosis is that those with the disease have an average lifespan that's 6 to 7 years shorter than that of the general population. Okay, so this is a little different because this is talking about MS actually shortening your life to some degree. Well, what is that based on? It says this number is likely based on research comparing the average lifespan of people with MS to that of people who don't have the disease. It's based on data, and there's the research there is a hyperlink, and you could click on that and find out what the research actually says, how many people were in the sample, any other demographic information that you would like to have, and see if you think that those statistics are based on solid data. And they go on to say, for example, a 2014 study, again, it's hyperlinked, found that among 30,000 people with MS and 89,000 people without MS, those with the disease lived about 6 fewer years than those who were otherwise healthy. Specifically, the subjects with MS lived to a median age of 76, while those without MS lived to a median age of 83, a difference of 7 years. Median refers to the middle number, meaning half of the people with MS died before the age of 76, and half of the people with the disease died after age 76. And then finally, doing what you can to live your best and longest life with MS, therefore, means eating well, exercising, coping with stress in positive ways, and seeing your healthcare provider periodically for preventive care measures. As I said, making sure that your general health is in good shape. And if not, find out what you need to fix and fix it. Because you may not be able to cure your MS, but you can certainly take care of high blood pressure or high cholesterol. You can do a lot towards that. Another paper that I looked at was from Medical News Today, and the article is called How Multiple Sclerosis Affects Life Expectancy. And this one was from March of 2002, so it's pretty recent. It's about a year old now. And it says that the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke says that a person with MS could expect to live as long as a person without the condition. However, this conclusion is fairly recent. So it seems like we go back and forth, doesn't it? Sometimes the prevailing wisdom is that MS shortens your life just a little bit, and other times the prevailing wisdom is that it doesn't. And the article goes on to talk about outlook by type of MS, and I thought this was kind of interesting. It says that there are slight differences in life expectancy depending on the type of MS a person has. Most people with MS have relapsing remitting MS. After symptoms first appear, on average, a person may experience a relapse once a year, but may get them more frequently. Between relapses, their condition typically remains stable. According to a 60-year longitudinal population study published in 2017, the life expectancy for relapsing MS is 77.8 years. Roughly in the ballpark of 76, I guess, a little longer. And this is the type of MS that most people start out with, not everyone, but like 85% of people start out with relapsing MS. And some people never go anywhere beyond that. However, it says many people with relapsing MS will eventually develop secondary progressive MS. This means they continue to have alternating flares and periods of recovery, but will experience a steady worsening of symptoms. I've always thought that secondary progressive is kind of the no man's land because in theory, that's where I'm at. And I can't say that that description fits me particularly. I don't know that I really have flares or periods of recovery, and I don't know about steady worsening of symptoms. I guess so. I don't know. It's pretty subtle. If they're worsening, it's awfully hard to tell. But, I'm not in relapsing anymore, and I'm not in primary, so I must be in secondary. Why not? It's a good catch-all category. And then finally, however, if a person has primary progressive MS, their life expectancy is slightly lower at 71.4 years. This is because primary progressive MS involves progressing symptoms that never go into remission, and it can be harder to treat. And I should point out here that this is not a universal view of how MS is. I know it's the basic model of MS and how it's usually explained to people, but there are doctors like Dr. Gavin Giovannoni who believe that all MS is progressive MS, and just because you don't see something on an MRI and it doesn't show up in your spinal fluid, doesn't mean that there isn't damage going on at the cellular level. We're going to talk about the comorbidities that I've already mentioned before, conditions that you also deal with in addition to your MS. These are the ones that can most impact the risk of death. There's several different categories. The physical would include diabetes, and that's a very important one. That's becoming much more prevalent in our population now, partly because of the way we tend to eat. At least in the United States, our diets are such that we end up with diabetes. Many of us are walking around with prediabetes and don't even know it. Chronic lung disease, and that again is on the rise. There's a lot more COPD than there used to be. And then ischemic heart disease. Anything to do with the heart, obviously, is very serious. There are also psychological conditions that can be comorbidities. Depression is a big one. And, you know, the statistics continue to show that depression is pretty common with people who have MS. And why not, right? I mean, it's kind of a rational response to being told you have multiple sclerosis. It is kind of depressing. And anxiety might also accompany that because you no longer know how you're going to handle certain situations or what the future might hold for you. And if you dwell on that too much, you could become anxious. But that's a comorbidity that can really affect your lifespan. And then finally, bipolar disorder, which is actually something that can be controlled somewhat with medication. And then other comorbidities that are common with MS, they say, include these: congestive heart failure, high blood pressure, stroke, and high cholesterol. Well, these are common in the population at large, not just those with MS. But these are serious conditions, and they do need to be dealt with. And then finally, they say the higher incidence of these comorbidities may not be due to MS itself, but due to risk factors that are more common in people with MS. And I wondered why that might be. But they go on to give an example. They say reduced mobility, for example, can lead to excess weight, and this can impact the risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So in other words, in the past, you might have been a very active person, but once you were less mobile, you became more sedentary, but your eating habits didn't change, and so you ended up putting on extra weight. Well, we all know that having extra weight increases your risk of a number of different diseases, heart disease being a big one, but there's others as well, blood pressure problems and the like. Here's another article that was published in May of 2022, and this one appeared in Multiple Sclerosis News Today, and it's multiple sclerosis prognosis and life expectancy. And they say that MS itself is not usually fatal. However, the disorder may increase the risk of life-threatening complications such as severe infections or swallowing difficulties that can set the stage for pneumonia. And I have heard that pneumonia is a frequent cause of hospitalization and death with multiple sclerosis, and part of that is because we can have trouble with things like swallowing. No two people with MS experience exactly the same symptoms or patterns of disease progression. Much like there are risk factors for developing MS, there are varying components that can also affect the disease course. And these include treatment, because there's many different treatment options, and some of them carry certain risks, and some of them are more effective than others. Lifestyle factors, and we've been talking some about that, our diet, how active we are, whether we smoke, whether we have good solid friendships, those sorts of things. Biological traits. Okay, there is some genetic component to MS. It's really unclear exactly what that is, but there's enough of of a correlation where people who have MS have a greater chance of having a child with MS, or if you have a sibling who has MS, you have a slightly greater chance of having MS yourself. There are some genetic components involved in getting multiple sclerosis. Disease intrinsic factors, that has to do with what we've already talked about. What type of MS do you have, and how quickly is it progressing? They don't really talk about this, but I've seen in other articles that the age at which you first get MS makes a difference in the course of your disease and how long you're likely to live. So people who've had their first symptoms in their 20s, say, are likely, it's never ironclad, but they're likely to do better with MS than people who get it later in life. If you develop MS in your 50s or your 60s, it's more likely to be a progressive form of MS, and it's more likely to be pretty aggressive. And then finally, demographics such as race and sex. We know that there are twice as many women who get MS as men. And the race thing, I think they're still learning about that. At one time, they thought that really it was more of a Caucasian thing, but they're finding now that that isn't the case at all. It's just that they weren't really getting good reports and accurate information. But now that they are learning more about who gets MS, they're realizing race may not be as big of a factor as they thought initially. And then finally, I wanted to just mention Terry Walls. She is a doctor who was diagnosed some time back with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, and it progressed pretty fast. And at one point, she wasn't even really able to walk or do much, but she became very frustrated with the traditional ways of dealing with MS in the medical community, and she decided she was going to take control of it herself by changing how she eats. And her diet is pretty much a paleo keto kind of diet. She's got a book about it, and it's a good healthy diet, I think. And I don't know that it would work for everybody, but in her case, it turned her MS around so that she was able to resume her life pretty much. She still practices medicine and she's still a fairly active person. But I was reading an article that she wrote some time back, and she said something I thought was very interesting. She talked about the difference between lifespan and health span. So she said that she isn't as concerned about her lifespan and what that might be, but she is concerned about her health span. So how long she lives is less important than the quality of the life that she has. And I thought that was a very, very useful thing to think, because we can do an awful lot to control our health conditions. We can control our diet. We can control how much activity, exercise we do. We can control our social connectivity with other people. There are a number of factors that play into the quality of life that are really under our control. Whether we smoke, whether we drink, whether we get enough sleep. There are so many good things we can be doing. I really appreciated being able to think through that a little bit, because that is really, for me, at least at the place where I'm at right now, having had MS for 38 years, being 63 years old, I guess I could be looking at things like longevity. But I'm really more concerned about how healthy am I going to be for whatever years are left to me. Yeah, so we don't know how long we're going to live. And so even if we follow the Walls protocol or do anything, get our blood pressure under control, lower our cholesterol, make a whole bunch of new friends, get plenty of sleep, there's no guarantee of anything, right? But one nice thing about all of those lifestyle factors is that they're all things that we can influence, that we can do something about. So I have thought, taking my cue from Terry Walls, I've thought, yeah, maybe I just need to be focusing on my health span, not so much my lifespan. I want to be as healthy as I can possibly be for as long as I can possibly be healthy. because then my quality of life is going to be so much better. I'd rather be healthy and live to 85 than be sickly and live to 100. And I don't know, maybe I'll feel differently about that when I'm 85, but right now, it sounds good to me. So this is just kind of this is the foundation video. I'm going to be making a few more in the future that will cover various aspects of this sort of lifestyle management so that I can share some of what I'm learning about how best to eat and how best to take care of myself so that I can maintain my general good health for as long into the future as I possibly can. And I'd love to hear from you as well. What kinds of things do you do to keep yourself healthy despite having multiple sclerosis? What do you think of the different studies that I've talked about today? Have you got any other ones that you want to share? Let me know in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. But in the meantime, take care of yourself, really good care of yourself. And I'll see you again in my next video.